Hug a Pillow and Pretend. Written by One Unlucky Clover. Read by Arashi. Shuichi hummed in response to Kaito's long rambling. It wasn't like he didn't like the conversation. He just didn't know what to respond with. The space facts were interesting, and Kaito's voice was so nice, but he couldn't form words in his mind to respond with. He decided to check how long the video call had lasted. 2 hours and 28 minutes. It wasn't even that late yet where he was. In fact, he was sure Kaito was 2 hours ahead of him, making it around midnight where Kaito was. So why was he so tired? Shuichi had stayed up later on calls, much later, but for some reason, he felt like he was going to pass out any second. But he couldn't. He didn't want to leave the call, not because he'd feel guilty about leaving Kaito, but because he didn't want their time together to end. Calls between them were few and far between. One was always at school when the other wasn't, and the few hours after school that they shared were barely enough time to talk to each other. It just so happened that both of them were on a small, mandatory winter break from school. Though Shuichi would love to spend this time catching up on grades, he was just so excited when Kaito offered to start a call. It had been maybe 2 or 3 months since their last one, so Shuichi just couldn't pass up the opportunity. Now, it had been almost 3 hours of listening to Kaito talk about space from the other side of the country, and he was having the time of his life. Occasionally, Kaito would boast about good grades, and Shuichi would praise him, and watch as he would look so giddy and try not to look overly excited about it. Shuichi couldn't put into words how much he adored Kaito, how he looked, how he sounded, his personality, the way he texted. Every damn thing was perfect. So perfect. It was unfair. But when Kaito switched the call from video to just voice, Shuichi realized that the other probably caught on his tiredness. Shuichi hated that Kaito soon offered to hang up and let Shuichi sleep, so he started saying random excuses to why he had suddenly seemed a tad bit quieter. It wasn't even good excuses, just whatever Kaito would believe in. And it worked. They quickly went back to talking. Shuichi even made an effort to talk more and make him seem less suspicious. They talked about whatever came to mind. Words started to become just silly noises, made to make both of them happy. The conversations didn't matter, just the voices themselves. Shuichi loved it. He could just imagine Kaito laying in his bed with his phone, talking endlessly to Shuichi with a soft smile. Shuichi laughed at a joke Kaito said and rolled onto his side, clutching a pillow in his arms, and in the back of his head, pretending it was Kaito. He tossed the pillow away in an instant, feeling embarrassment overcome him. What he was doing was far too childish for him, and he was sure that if Kaito knew what he was doing and thinking this very moment, he'd be mortified and refuse to talk to him again. But when Kaito started saying something about how nice he thought Shuichi's newly blue-dyed hair looked in the pictures he just sent, he felt a voice of reason and a voice of fantasy enter his brain. The voice of reason tried saying how Kaito would be flattered, if anything, by Shuichi's silly antics. But his voice of fantasy told him, what if Kaito is doing the same? What if he's lying in bed holding a pillow, or his cat, and pretending it was Shuichi? Shuichi, of course, couldn't help but feel giddy at the possibility, even if realistically, he knew that Kaito wouldn't probably do that. But was it so wrong for him to hope? Apparently not, because every sentence that Kaito was saying, Shuichi imagined he said it while bundled up in a blanket, holding a pillow and wearing cute pajamas with little stars on them. Though once again, while Kaito droned on, Shuichi couldn't help but get tired from his voice again. It was just so relaxing, and Shuichi didn't have a word to describe why. Maybe it was the tone, or the pitch, or maybe it was because it was Kaito. Yes, That must be it. Everything else about Kaito always brought a sense of cozy calmness over Shuichi. He was sure his voice was no different in that regard. Plus, he just had a nice voice. Shuichi should recommend that he made audiobooks, or those podcasts that are meant to set people to sleep. Just like what was happening... No. Oh no. Shuichi tried staying awake. He really did. He didn't want to go to sleep and hang up with Kaito. But it was so hard. It seemed that even after trying to force himself awake for so long, sleep just seemed to always catch up to him. He began trying to open his mouth, to tell Kaito he had to go. But something stopped him. Something in his head told him that he could last just a little bit longer for his best friend. He could listen to Kaito for just 5 more minutes, maybe 10, or maybe 20. If some god was really on his side, he might get another hour, if he just tried his best to stay awake. He would just rest his eyes for a second, so that he could be more awake. But sleep still slowly crept up on him, and he knew it. He couldn't even will himself to open his eyes. He knew he should just tell Kaito good night and hang up. But he didn't. He felt so content with Kaito talking him to sleep that he just didn't care. Plus, Kaito was understanding. Maybe he wouldn't think twice about it and just assume it was an accident. Shuichi didn't dwell on it any longer. He couldn't even tell what Kaito was saying before he was out cold. He woke up 2 hours later, making it midnight for him and 2 a.m. for Kaito. He checked his phone, half expecting to see angry messages from Kaito, telling him he was rude for sleeping while on call. But instead, he saw something completely different. The call was still on. The timestamp was still ongoing, and Kaito's icon still showed that he hadn't left the call. And, to Shuichi's delight, he could hear soft snoring through the speakers. He wasn't able to place why that made him so happy, but it did. He supposed that it was the knowledge that Kaito decided to join on his slumber on call. Shuichi sighed and smiled, trying to hold back a giggle, and hunkered back down and fell asleep again. They could talk about this in the morning. Shuichi didn't bother to hang up.